Hello, everybody. Welcome to All Villa No Filler. Please remember to like and subscribe. Triple lining the subscribe bit. If I could put it on there, just remember to help us keep on growing, so we can just keep on doing this podcast, basically. Uh, well, so lots going on in the world of Aston Villa. It's like the movie Twisters. Hurricane or tornadoes everywhere, things blowing around, Monchi doing this, Unai, Professor Unai doing that. Hard to keep up. Like me chasing Unai, chasing Unai Bolt, Usain Bolt, in a 100-meter race. But so I claw my way to the finish line after he's finished 20 seconds, 30 seconds ahead of me. Um, Moussa Diaby. It's not something I've talked about yet, because I think a lot of the noise felt like just that. It didn't really feel like the sources out there really were something worth looking at too much yet. But it certainly gained a lot more ground today. It looks like Mr. Diaby could very well be on his way to Saudi Arabia to play for Al-Ittihad. Of course, last season, Aston Villa went head to head with Al Nassr, another Saudi club, to try and sign Diaby. So clearly, Diaby has some links, or his team clearly have links to the owners of clubs in that league. So it's something that clearly he's thought about before and has interest in, and sounds like he might well have interest in it now. Where do I think about it? So one of the fees that went around today was 55 million euros. Uh, I personally think the 55 million euro fee sounds too low. Ben Jacobs from GiveMeSport has said that Villa won't sell for 55 million or close. The overall package would need to be 70 million euros plus, which is not far off what Al Hilal paid for Neymar. If Diaby departs, it will be for very good money at the Villa. Uh, so yes, it would have to be. I think primarily the points, I think it has to be far higher than the 50 million, 55 million I've seen floating around. Firstly, you need significant profit on a player that we, according to the Athletic, spent 34 million pounds on last year plus add-ons. Now, I've seen a lot of different fees flying around for what we pay for Diaby, and it doesn't feel like anyone really fully knows, do they? I've seen 50 million last season we got him for. I've seen, and this is pounds by the way, so obviously different to euros. 70 million euros translates to roughly about 60 million pounds, I think, there or thereabouts. Uh, so were we to sell him for, let's imagine, 60 million pounds, and we bought him for 35, who knows what the add-ons are that we've paid. So you'd think Villa want to make a very significant profit on this player. I don't think 50 million euros or 55 million euros necessarily gets really that close enough to that. And on top of it, Moussa Diaby for the Saudi League, not just Al Ittihad, but the Saudi League, would be a stellar signing. He's in his mid 20s. He's approaching his prime. He's had a very, I mean, he was excellent at points for Bayer Leverkusen. He's a French international. He's had 1 year at Aston Villa adapting to a new role. He played in every single league game we had last year. His statistics were 10 goals overall, 9 assists. In the Premier League itself, he got 6 goals, 8 assists, and three in Europe as well. Adapting to a new position. He didn't play second striker for Leverkusen, he played as a winger. Um, Adapting to a new league, a new culture, entirely new team approach, everything about it. But particularly the second striker role is the thing I want to emphasize the most, because that is what he, ultimately was adapting to. And I think that what happened was he started really, really fast. This season, he had a great start, particularly the Everton 4-0 second game of the season at home. I thought he was absolutely exceptional in that game. And he really showed, all the way through the season that there's real talent there. So we've just spent a year developing a player who you would think has a much higher ceiling than what he's shown so far. and that this was an adaptation season, and next season and the year after is where you would expect him to do kind of what Leon Bailey's done. Maybe he doesn't reach Leon Bailey's level because Bailey was absolutely incredible last season, but at least something approaching that kind of a glow up, as we call it in the fashion world on Entertainment News. So, yes, I think this would have to be a very, very significant fee. And I think 70 million is probably closer to what Villa would want or should want. And like I say, it's an absolute star signing for the Saudi League. It's a real big coup to attract a player who's been a key part of a team that's just gone into the Champions League, who would be, frankly, a younger player who then sends the message out to the rest of football that this is a potential destination for young players to go to. I mean, culturally, Saudi Arabia, it's different, of course, to Europe generally, so or the UK at least, and so is that somewhere that he'd fit into? Is it somewhere he wants to be? He wants to bring his kids up? All those sorts of things come into it, and if that's the case, then fair enough. That's the way it is. I think my gut instinct is telling me I don't want to lose Diaby. I think he's got quite a way to go. Do I think he was necessarily uh, do I think necessarily as a second striker that's his best position? Um, I have wondered at times this season whether Mohamed Kudus would have been a better signing for that particular role. Came in for sort of similar fees. I think West Ham last season, they'd just won a European trophy. They probably had more money to spend than we did at the time. But I sort of think Kudus. I think the way he plays, he's a bit better he's a little bit more physical, I think, than Diaby. And I think Kudus is a bit better in that kind of tight area and doesn't necessarily excel more, when he has space to run into, as I think Diaby does. And I think Diaby ultimately, ideally, he'd be playing right midfield as a winger. I think that's really where he's probably at his best. But I think he did very well, in his first season playing as a second striker. And yes, there were times this season where it felt like he got a little bit physically shut out in games. But again, it's an adaptation season. So you do have to expect that things like that are going to happen and that he can use those experiences to then grow in the second season and the third season. So Villa kind of are back to a bit of square one if we let Diaby go and bring in a new player who you would think needs to adapt. That said, that doesn't. You could also look at players within the Premier League and think, could Villa go for someone like that? For instance, I know I've said this name a million times and people are going to laugh at me. Morgan Gibbs-White. Would he be gettable for Nottingham Forest? Do they have PSR issues of their own? He's a player who's got experience in the Premier League. He's very physical. And I think as a second striker, that's certainly a role that I think he could probably adapt to. And I think also he could play out wide if he has to, or he could come back into a centre midfield role, drop a bit deeper. Again, if that's something we need. And versatility is the order of the day at Aston Villa when we've got our own PSR issues as well. In a year's time, will the Diaby sale, if it goes through, it's not gone through yet, but if it did, for a significant profit, would it help us with PSR? You'd probably have to think it would. And maybe would mean that this time next year or next June, next May, we're not kind of having to really, be a bit panicked about who and what we're going to sell. I still think we're going to have to sell a big player next season. I just think that's where we are with PSR at the moment. That isn't always the worst. It's not the worst thing in the world. That's how all teams do it. All teams sell. Sometimes you sell players who haven't even hit their peak. Sometimes you sell players at their peak, and then you recoup that and you reinvest and you just build again. And where Villa are at the moment in the football ecosystem, that's something we have to be really, really good at. And it shows, I think, recently that I think Monchi still, we'll look back in a few years and see how it all pans out. But I think so far, so good with Monchi and Unai Emery. And Morgan Rogers is a good example of a player who, is coming for relatively cheap, nothing really, and gone on to do great things. Do I think Jaden Philogene will be a replacement for Diaby. I don't think so. I think he has a similar profile to him, um, in that he can probably play as that second striker. But again, he's somebody who I think is better as a winger, and I think his role will likely be him and Bailey outright mostly. But also, if Villa want to play a little bit more down the left, because we just don't do that at all, do we? We tend to have a left foot back bombing on down there, but we don't really have anyone who just clings to the touchline out on the left in the way Bailey does on the right. If that's something Villa want to do with Philogene, that is something we can do with him. Um, I'm not necessarily, look, I'm not some sort of bloody oracle and saying that I'm getting, who really believes entirely what I'm saying is going to turn out to be totally accurate, which is why I want you to comment, describe, tell me what you think about this move. But I think that whilst I don't want the Derby to go, I think I see the logic behind it if Aston Villa are willing to reinvest and maybe go for a profile player who a kind of a Kudus, I guess, or a Gibbs White, uh, maybe someone who just or a lot picker. Alex Bayena's name's come up a lot. I know I've mentioned his name a lot, so I'm probably a part of the reason for that. But you can other players as well who can possibly fit into that role. Who knows? Maybe even Emi Buendia himself will come back and fit into that role. But I don't. I think he's a. I think Diaby's a very, very talented player, and I think losing him is um, it's going to be an adjustment. And again, like I say, it's a year we've developed him ready and primed for this season. So that's why I think partly why I think he's worth so much more money than I think he's been currently said. Although 70 million euros is getting a lot closer to what I think a player who would be a star signing for Saudi Arabia as a league, let alone Al-Ittihad, um, what he would be worth. Um, so yes. Otherwise, you know, who who would Villa replace him with? Like I said, I think it's going to be a fascinating few weeks, and I think Villa are going to make another couple of big moves. Amadou Onana, of course, that's 50 million quid again, according to David Ornstein at the Athletic, that Aston Villa are willing to spend on him. I've just done an interview about it, so I'll be putting that out very very soon. Uh, I think Onana's going to be an interesting signing indeed, but he's not a Diaby replacement, is he? So, like I say, maybe maybe just I just keep coming back to Gibbs White and Alex Baena. I know they're different players, Acutis, but somebody's a little bit more got a bit more hustle and bustle about them. I think with Diaby, were I to wonder whether he'd ever be able to get over this, is that there were times last season when I think and I remember going to the Wolves game at home when we won 1-0 or 2-0, was it? It goes out of my head now. I think it might have been 2-0 actually. Was where Diaby scored in that game, scored the hardest shot of the season in the Premier League itself. But what I noticed would happen to him a lot is that he would play as that second striker, he'd come deep, and there'd be a giant centre back following him everywhere. And there were games where it felt like he sort of struggled to overcome that. But like I say, would it be something he'd ever overcome? I think you have to give the benefit of that and think, there's a strong chance he would eventually. But in Monchi, in Unai Emery in particular, particularly Unai Emery, we have to trust him. We have to trust whatever vision it is he has for, if Diaby goes, how that might help us financially, but also what it might mean we can do with regards to reinvestment. You have to think there'd be a very exciting player coming in, maybe even two players coming in to fill the role that has been left by a potential outgoer in Diaby. I wish him well. I think he's been good for us this season and been been a big part in helping us get into Champions League football if he is indeed to go. But if he stays, I'll be very happy about that as well. Anyway, let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Up the mighty Villa.